YouTube, what's up? Back again for another daily fishing video here on Andrew Upshaw Fishing. Today's video is going to center around one of my favorite types of fishing. That's finesse fishing. But you know, I kind of take finesse fishing into just about every facet of my game. I don't care if it's between what people consider power fishing with like jigs. I throw smaller jigs. Or in this situation, crankbaits. And I'm going to talk about finesse cranking in that mid-depth. Not deep, not shallow, but that mid-depth where those fish hang out. I hope y'all enjoy this video. It's going to take you back in time when I first started finesse cranking and tell you how I do it now. I hope y'all enjoy this video. If you have not yet, though, hit that subscribe button in the bottom right-hand corner. I greatly would appreciate it. Comment below, what do you consider a finesse crankbait? What finesse crankbait do you throw? I always really like hearing about finesse crankbaits because I think I can add a lot to my game. I only have a handful that I throw currently. I hope y'all enjoy this video, and I'll see you here in just a second. Alright guys, today's video is going to be centered around finesse cranking, but more so that mid-depth finesse cranking. So when I was a young kid, I really grew up fishing a finesse crankbait. I didn't really know it was a finesse crankbait, but it absolutely was, and it's one of those ways that you can catch a lot of fish basically throughout the entire year. The bait I actually grew up fishing was a Bandit 200. A Bandit 200 is that type of bait that dives between 6 and 8 foot. Sometimes, depending on line size, you can manipulate it to dive to like 4 foot. So I grew up fishing this two different ways. So the first place that I ever really threw this was on Toledo Bend, and I was fishing creek channel turns. So I was fishing the outside channel turns where there was some timber stacked up, and you could take this Bandit 200, chartreuse and blue, any type of shad pattern, just some white shad pattern. Actually, the solid white one used to be one of our favorites. And you could catch, you know, you'd have 20, 30, 40 fish days on a Bandit 200. And, you know, I didn't realize just how good and how fortunate I was to learn that technique, because over the years, I've caught just a ton of bass on this particular bait. Well, then I started kind of using it around grass, and especially some of that deeper grass, that 6, 8 foot grass, and cranking it when everybody was throwing bigger baits. Once again, I'd catch a lot of fish. Now, granted, were they always tournament grade fish? Not always. Sometimes they were, though, and I definitely can tell you a story of which they were. So over the course of my career, I kept that finesse crankbait in my hand all the time. The deal is it's so good at getting bites. So to fast forward a bit, you know, I get past that early age of bass fishing, and I actually started fishing college stuff. And Ryan Watkins and I were fishing a tournament on the Red River. And Red River, especially the time of year that we were fishing it, was actually kind of tough. What we learned in that trip, though, is just how effective that Bandit 200 was for us at that particular event. So we were actually throwing one that's called Splatterback. He's going to stab me when he watches this video because he watches them all. We're throwing one called Splatterback. It's a black back, white side, chartreuse belly. And we absolutely destroyed them. And when guys were just having a really hard time even getting bites, we're catching 20 or 30 fish a day, cranking rocks, doing that kind of thing. Fast forward a bit more, we get to one of our bigger wins in college, and that was the Lake Somerville event at for FLW. And we won that with a really big bag on this last day. I think we had like 26 pounds or something. And we actually lost probably close to that morning, and so we adapted well that afternoon. And what we picked up was this bait right here. I mean, as you can tell, there's a lot of similarities between these two baits. This is a Strike King Series 3, and you can ask him. He's not sponsored by anybody. This is the bait I was throwing, and I caught a couple of the really big ones in our bag that particular day throwing this Series 3. One thing that I noticed, and I didn't notice it then because I just didn't know any better, but the shape of the bill is slightly different. You still have that rounded front, but the one thing about the Strike King bills is they have that little kick out, so it kind of makes it a hybrid bill, basically. So you kind of have the benefits of a round bill, but it still has the square bill attributes. Cranking around those rocks This, I feel like, got you more bites. And it also has this really high pitch rattle sound to it, while this has a real slow thud. And I don't know what made the huge difference, because I couldn't get bit on this one, but I could get bit on this one. Once again, we were just throwing solid white and just cranking it around. And that was an event where you could get a lot of bites. I mean, it wasn't really hard to get bites. It was just hard to catch quality. In this situation, finesse cranking was the deal. So when we found these fish, Watkins found one little section of these fish throwing like a Series 5. So, I mean, it was a bigger plug. He caught like a 5-pounder, 4-pounder, something like that. And then I went through with the Series 3 in the same area and really wrecked them. So you got to have that smaller crankbait, especially if they're getting a lot of pressure. They're not very deep. It's just like if you've watched some of my swim jig videos, especially the higher in the water column you get, the higher or the shallower you get, sometimes you got to make that bait look extremely realistic, much smaller, much more compact, and that's going to get you those bites. In this situation, the Series 3 absolutely shined. Now, over the years, I've fished a bunch of different shallow to mid-depth finesse crankbaits. And over the time, I've kind of adapted quite a few into my arsenal, but the two that I honestly throw them, I don't even throw the Bandit tuner anymore. And I'm not saying it's a bad bait. After catching that 26-pound bag at Somerville in the Series 3, if I throw a bait this size, I'm throwing the Series 3. It's just a confidence thing. When you catch multiple 6+ pounders on one bait, it kind of makes you want to throw that bait more often. The only other finesse crankbait, and I don't even know if you consider a finesse crankbait, but I know guys like Gunnersville and places like that will say that, but that's a DT6. Between these two finesse crankbaits, I feel like you can go literally anywhere in the country and catch them. Right now, though, is a fantastic time to catch them. So if you're fishing a river, for instance, like the Red River, the James River, Potomac, any of these places that have a little bit of offshore rock, the rock jetties, the Arkansas River, you can take that Series 3, shad color, chartreuse and blue, chartreuse and black, keep it pretty basic in your color selection, and you're going to load the boat. Especially when other guys are really struggling to catch those fish. I can think back of so many situations where the Series 3 has bailed me out in tournaments. Guys, it is a bait that I have tied on quite frequently, especially in tournaments. The DT6 is another one. I'll be honest with you, I probably keep the Series 3 tied on more. Maybe I should throw the DT6 more, but I keep the Series 3 on more. It's just like I said before, it's a confidence thing. Now, when it comes to gear, I keep my gear fairly basic. So if it's really early in the year, and I hope this makes sense. So like if I'm fishing pre-spawn with these medium diving finesse crankbaits, I'm going to use a 5-to-1 gear ratio reel. I know some guys are going to be like, dude, I don't crank that slow. I don't even own one that slow. And completely understand. You can get away with a 6-to-1, but you got to crank it so slow to get that real slow speed. That real subtle action that early in the year, I think, makes a difference. Now, as it gets warmer, as the water gets warmer, that's when I absolutely will go to 6-8-to-1, and I'll crank it quite a bit faster, and I think you will get more bites that way. So as the year gravitates, I'll go from slow to fast. I mean, I've even thrown them on 7-to-1s, the Series 3, and it absolutely is a killer sometimes, especially like early fall. I've definitely caught them really good that time of year cranking it. Now, as far as rod goes, I keep on basically one rod in my hands for this type of crankbait, and that is the Mark Rose Ledge Rod. It's a 7.6 small crankbait rod, so it's a 7.5-foot rod. So I know that sounds kind of crazy. The thing is with these real light baits, you got to have the perfect rod to make that cast. That particular rod has the perfect load on the tip and enough backbone that I can hook them at the end of my cast. And that's a big deal, guys. Like, I can't tell you how often I get guys that tell me that they're cranking in the first 3 cranks, they hook one and they get it halfway the boat and it jumps off. And I hate to say it, but typically that's the guys that are using fiberglass rods. And I'm that is one of the big reasons I don't throw a fiberglass rod when I'm cranking, is because so many of my fish hit on the end of my cast and I lose them with a fiberglass because you just cannot get that hook set. The other bad thing about a fiberglass rod is the fact that it's a lot harder to cast small baits. I promise, guys, it's really hard. If you haven't tried it, go out there and try it and you see for yourself. It's extremely hard to catch light baits with a fiberglass rod because you just don't have the load power that a graphite rod does, or that sling, you know, that right type of casting ability with that really small bait. So I use that 7.6 if and only if I'm having to target cast this Series 3 or this DT6 round cover. That is when I'll go with the 6.9 small crankbait rod, which happens to be my jerkbait rod and my topwater rod. I'll go with that rod. It's a good solid rod. It's a lot shorter than I want because, especially once again on long casts, and that's typically how I'm fishing this, is on long cast, I want to have the maximum amount of leverage on the hook set. Now when it comes to line, just like I said before, you can manipulate your line size to make this bait dive shallower or deeper. About the lightest I've ever gone is 8-pound test. I don't recommend it unless you just absolutely have to, because in that situation, if I'm having to throw this on 8, I'll just go to a 3XD and throw it on 10. You see what I'm saying? So like, you don't have to, you know, upsize your line or downsize your line just to get depth of this when there's a bait that literally dives like 2 to 4 foot past it anyway. So therefore you can keep the size line but not have to change your crankbait too much. But the optimal line size for me is anywhere between 10 and 14. I know 14 sounds big, but when you're fishing around big fish, or if you need to keep that bait a little higher in the water column to keep it above the grass, that's when I'm going to go to 14. And once again, I'll downsize to like 10 to 12 when I'm fishing around rock and timber and stuff like that. So guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this video about Finesse mid-depth cranking. It's definitely one of my favorite ways to catch bass. I know y'all can learn something from this, and I promise you, if you keep this bait on your deck, keep it in your hands, especially in those really tough events, you're going to catch a lot of bass. Guys, I hope y'all enjoy this video, and I'll see you on the next one.